Hello everyone, it's Jin'taan here, and welcome to your latest weekly dose of EVE Online news, this time covering the third week of August. Now, I said in the last episode that if things stayed quiet that I'd try and replace this spot with a different piece of content. Fortunately though, the forces of New Eden have conspired to make sure that that isn't the case, with a super capital fight, potentially the biggest one of 2019 so far, kicking off in Fade. Alongside that, we have the usual tick over of fighting between Legacy and Winter in the southeast as the two coalitions continue to brawl it out. And finally, we have another long list of changes planned for September released by CCP, and I'm sure we'll see a few more of them from FanFest at Home, which will start around 2 hours from the point that I started penning this script. Right, well, let's not beat around the bush and dig right into the biggest thing to talk about this week, which is the fight that took place in Fade this Tuesday, centered around the system of O1Y TAC ED. Dead Coalition and Snuffed Out have been fighting in this area and the surrounding regions for a decent amount of time, thanks to Snuffed Out's holdings in Pure Blind being easily in range of Fade, allowing them to project their power into that region, and leading to fights over various objectives, such as a Sino-Jammer in the border system between Fade and Decline that took place on the 7th. It seems that unlike most of the wars that I cover on this channel, this one is predominantly focused on trying to get content from the defender, with little to no soft warfare being attempted to try and push Dead Coalition's capital umbrella back. And this is likely due in part to Dead Coalition simply being the only party of similar size and power to Snuffed Out in the area around their current position, with other coalitions like Pure Blind Madness and the various residents of Tribute being notably smaller than them and having vastly less capital power. In order to set up this fight, Snuffed Out reinforced both a Tatara and a faction Fortizar in the system, with both their initial RF and second RF being uncontested, making this final fight a do or die over the whole timer of both structures. As such, about an hour after downtime, the two sides began to set up. Dead Coalition brought a Rattlesnake fleet and a Loki fleet, while Snuffed Out brought a Legion fleet backed up by their allies in the Initiative, who brought a Stuka fleet consisting of shield bombers and command destroyers. Being outnumbered in the sub-capital fight, Snuffed Out had chosen to bring a small contingent of capitals to bear initially, with a group of dreadnoughts and fax being positioned on grid near the faction Fortizar in order to cover their Legion fleet as it whittled away at the timer. This didn't deter Dead Coalition from engaging, and we saw both their Rattlesnake and Loki fleets warp into this setup and light a Sino. This brought in the initial wave of escalation to the fight as Dead Co jumped in a Dread Bomb, which is the colloquial term for a large force of dreads designed to gank an opponent's capital presence on the grid, as well as fax to support their battleship doctrine. Snuff responded to this by dropping more dreads of their own to try and even the DPS balance of the fight up, which led to a second wave of capital escalation as Dead Coalition brought in a second group of dreads on the other side of Snuff's capital deployment. After this, both sides continued to trade blows and trickle a few more dreads into the fight, whilst the Initiative's Suka fleet tried its best to defang the Rattlesnake fleet with bombs, using the AoE damage to prevent them from dropping drones. At this point, it seemed as though Dead Coalition still had the dread advantage, and after a short break, Snuffed Out dropped Titans at range around 200 kilometers off of this dread brawl. This allowed them to shoot hostile dreads with their rails and beams, as well as DD them, whilst not being in range of Dead Coalition's already committed dread fleet. When I asked Tau AD what caused him to escalate this fight, he replied with the following: "We escalated because why play this game without having fun? It's just pixels and the game is so boring right now," which is at the very least an admirable attitude to take. This mass jump in of supercapitals had the expected number of bumps, as all of them dropped in a 10-kilometer diameter sphere, which, given that Titans are often longer than that sphere is wide, can cause them to spawn inside one another's geometry whilst jumping, having the effect of launching them in random, unpredictable directions, and in this case leaving them outside of the protection of the main fleet, where they could be quickly bubbled by Dead Coalition's sub-capitals. This led to Dead Coalition escalating the fight themselves, dropping their own long-range Titans and supercarriers in a mirror position behind their own close-range Dread fleet, and began to fire off their own first volley of DDs onto those bumped-off Titans. This allowed them to pick off the first Titan of the fight in Weaslaw, followed by the second in Mr. Pippi, who was the most expensive Titan to actually die in the fight, although a Moloch was present. Snuff was quick to adapt on their own side, and only 3 minutes after their first Titan loss, the score was even to 2-1, as ATTK's Ragnarok fell. One quirk of the fight that began to develop at this point, however, was that both sides lacked the critical mass to use DDs to simply volley each other's Titans, which was a tactic that we saw extensively used in large fights like X-47 in 2018. As a result of this and the large amount of facts on field to extend the lives of those targeted, Snuff Titans were able to use both smart bombs and regular bombs from their supporting Stuka fleet to destroy the bubbles that were on top of them, allowing them to often warp off in low armor. As such, Dead Coalition switched their focus and began to DD facts instead, killing 53 of them over the course of the fight, whilst instead Snuff continued to focus their DDs on the less heavily tanked Ragnaroks, killing 4 more of them. The fight continued like this for some time, with both fleets trading blows, before Dead Coalition's efforts to reduce the amount of facts on the field hit the level where they could resume trying to kill Titans, with Meridian and High 1-ton Destroyer dying next. This seems to have signalled the need to end the fight to Snuff, and shortly after this point enough bubbles were able to be cleared from the snuffed supercapital fleet by their subcapital fleets that they were able to simply warp off of grid and safe up, with the Pandemic Horde Harpy fleet arriving just a little too late to whore on any Titans. Both the Fortizar and the Tatara survived this engagement, and Dead Coalition were able to hold the field. The final Butcher's Bill here was 725 billion ISK lost by Snuff, and 569 billion ISK lost by Deadco, making the fight surprisingly even given the larger supercapital presence manifested by Deadco, and meaning that the fight in total cost around 1.3 trillion ISK, or around a quarter of a month's mining in Delve, depending on how you want to look at it. To wrap up this segment, I asked both sides' FCs, Sword Dragon and Tau AD, what they thought the impact of the proposed Sino changes would have been on this fight. Both of them noted that they expected them to have negative impacts on fights like this, as faxes and other tanky Sinos are currently considered a necessary part of your escalation chain in order to bring supercapitals to bear, as a Force Recon or Black Ops lack the tank to survive dedicated fire from opposing subcapital fleets or an already set up LR Titan fleet for long enough to allow an opposing supercapital fleet to jump in. I would speculate that in practice this gives the advantage to the person who drops supercaps at range first, by allowing them to deny their opponents the opportunity to safely do the same through their tremendous grid control. However, I've never FC'd supers personally and probably never will, so as always I'll leave it up to you guys to form your own opinions. Moving down to the southeast there, as always, has been action between the two warring coalitions as numerous timers have played out over the past week. Both sides have continued extensive Sov warfare campaigns with Faith Abolis, Detorid and Scalding Pass all being affected, and this led to a massive sprawl of timers that stretched over 14 hours of the day on Wednesday, beginning in the Chinese time zone and ending deep in the US time zone. In response to these timers, Legacy attempted to head off Winter Coalition's advance in 4060p, a system we covered just last week, which is the connection point between the two groups' territory in the direction of Faith Abolis. When Winter Coalition jumped their own fleet into this system via 77S8, a Munin duel that we've seen several times in this war so far commenced, both sides brawling it out on the regional gate grid. In this case, Winter Coalition came out marginally ahead, with 47 billion in losses being traded for 61 billion in kills, whilst also forcing Legacy to leave the grid and allowing Winter to progress towards the targeted region of Faith Abolis. After arriving in this region, the Sov warfare commenced, with Winter Coalition being able to pick up 4 iHub kills and a TCU kill out of the 40 total timers. However, they were unable to capitalise on these gains, and the iHubs were able to be replaced by Legacy rather than by Winter. They were briefly able to hold onto a TCU, however that has since been destroyed and reclaimed by Legacy as well, leaving Faith Abolis firmly under Legacy control, and Winter without a foothold in the region. The Detorid timers saw little progress by either side, with the only notable change being Winter Coalition destroying the BOZ1 iHub, although it was replaced by Legacy rather than by Winter. This has the impact of resetting the ADMs of the system, making it potentially easier to attack in the future. However, the strategic index of the system, which determines what upgrades can be placed in the iHub, such as the crucial Sinosaural suppression upgrade which allows the usage of Tenebrex Sino-jamming structures, is unaffected. Now, a less strategically important fight, but something that's interesting nonetheless, was Army of Mango's pipe bomb on a Fraternity fleet on Monday. For those unfamiliar, pipe bombing is the combination of using a drag bubble on the gate and smart bombing battleships to present a sphere of overwhelming DPS that applies even whilst slowing down to exit warp, as it doesn't require a lock to function and you aren't actually invulnerable whilst in warp. If used properly, this can lead to the near complete destruction of an opposing fleet with little to no counterplay, and in this case that was true, with 23 billion ISK being lost. The reason I wanted to highlight this is less the use of the tactic in the first place, although it's undeniably an impressive thing to pull off, but more to note that this is one of the first times we've seen an army of mangoes engage with Fraternity. These two Chinese entities fought each other extensively on Serenity, with the army of mangoes iteration on that server, PIBC, effectively pushing many pilots to Tranquility in the first place, so it's nice to see such an old rivalry being continued in a completely different universe. Accompanying all this action has been a lot of rustling in the political weeds, with Siberian squads who are deployed to Curse supposedly switching sides, now supporting Winter instead of Legacy. However, the impact of this, and whether Siberian squads was even aiding Legacy before this in any serious capacity, was brought under question in the Reddit thread which declared it. If someone from Siberian squads would like to clarify the situation in the comments or in DMs to me, I'd appreciate that. I've also personally and anecdotally noticed much stronger cooperation between PanFam and Winter under their PandaFam guise, both on the front lines with Pandemic Legion helping to set up timers in Winter's weaker time zones, and a more integrated presence in each other's fleets, but also behind them, with Winterco members using PanFam space as a safer place to make ISK than their clearly embattled home regions. The extent of that and just what it means going forwards is at this point unclear, and I'll note that it could just be a small number of people doing so, but it does make for an interesting thing to note nonetheless. Finally, we have the announcements of new changes that are heading to the test server from CCP Lebowski. There's a lot of smaller quality of life changes, such as improvements to the in-game fitting tool to better indicate how a ship should be fit, plus UI and tutorial changes, but nestled in there are two very significant alterations to gameplay. The first is that ships will now have a 3-minute cap on how long they can attempt to enter warp whilst being prevented from aligning, either via bumping off of geometry or being actively bumped by another player. It's worth noting that whilst this timer can simply be reset by cancelling the warp command with either a point or a scram, but this will make keeping a freighter in place to be ganked much more difficult. The second change is that FOF missiles will now be range capped. This prevents the PvE farming tactic that was somewhat popular in Wormholes of using FOF missiles to fire from over 250 kilometers in order to completely outrange the NPCs present and kill them before they could get in range, without the need to even directly lock them. This effectively removes the last niche usage that missiles had in the game after the ECM changes, so I'd recommend literally never using them and just forgetting that they exist, as I'm sure CCP will after this change. Alright, well, before we close out, I'd like to give a thank you to Dustin Prater, my current only $5 patron, as well as a general thank you to everyone who stepped up to support the channel. If you'd like to join them in doing so, you can check the link in the description below for all the cool benefits that you'll get for being a patron. Until next time guys, take care and fly smart.